So today and tomorrow, we're covering, the topic that we're covering is layers. You've already used layers, but this lesson goes into it a bit more in depth. Okay. Really, layers are a way of organizing your project. I don't know that it's any more than that, but in this lesson, it gets fairly complex with the use of sublayers and templates and clipping masks and all sorts of things. So today we'll deconstruct the finished version, which is what you see here. If we look at the start version, so let me go ahead and open layers here. And you can see with the finished version, looks like we have a lot going on here. Let me go ahead and close this. Yeah, we start off with one layer. And these are all the parts, and they provide us with all the parts of the lesson. And if we look at the finished version, again, and I close this, you can see that we really only have 2 layers. But within those layers lies some important features of layers that we need to cover. That, for example, if we look at the outline of the cell phone, that's the purpose of this design, is to design an interface for a cell phone. Well, you want this to be a guide and a template to use to size and to organize your files. But you can see that that phone body lies on its own layer, and I can turn that off, and that it is locked by default, or at least in this lesson. But if we look at the other layer, or the phone contents, and we twirl down on that, you can see that there's a whole bunch of information in here, okay? There's lots and lots of files in here. Let me go ahead and pull this down a little bit more. Let me pull ahead and pull that off. There we go. So you can see all the other elements in here as well. That if we look at just the layer itself, the phone content, we have that. But within that, we have like 3 separate sublayers. We have a clipping mask, which I'll talk about in a bit, show you what that does. It's basically like drawing inside a shape. And it existed before you could draw inside a shape. So if I turn that off, notice that the entire photograph of the image appears. But if I turn the clipping mask back on, then it hides part of the mask and cuts, or part of the photograph and cuts part of it off. Likewise, if we look at the main content here, that's the main menu, and then you twirl down on that, you can see that it contains 2 sublayers within that. Now, do you have to use sublayers? I rarely do, but in this particular lesson, it's a very effective way of organizing the files. If I twirl down on that, you can see that it has, again, another sublayer within that, and all of these additional pieces. So tucked away in all of these sublayers are additional parts of our project. Okay, and organized in a very nice fashion, neat, tidy fashion. Okay, so today I just want to cover the basics of layers and not go into the details of the lesson itself, but talk about what you can do with layers. One of the things that they don't talk about in this lesson with layers, but I do want to talk about that, is if I select, for example, a layer or an element on a layer, notice that the little tick mark appears to the right. If I twirl down and I select a specific element, and then within that sublayer, if I select, oh boy, they have so many sublayers in here. Let's go ahead and select Then, okay, well, contained within that little tick mark just means that the layer is selected. But if we select a particular object in here, it should show up as a little tick mark here as well. In addition to that, you'll notice a little dots to the right here. I want to talk about what these do. Okay, and I want to talk about the buttons at the bottom of the layers panel and describe and explain what they do. Okay, so then I'm going to go ahead and I want to revert and make sure that I have all of my original file here. There we go. And I'm going to close that so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to open up a brand new file that I have started at the very end here to show you exactly what layers do and explain to you how I organize my layers. Typically for even a basic project, I have at least maybe 3 or 4 different layers, but organized in slightly different fashion than how the book does it. So to explain what layers do, is that everything in Illustrator is layered on top of one another. Even if it exists within a layer, it's still structured like sheets of paper stacked on top of one another. So if I start by clicking and dragging a brand new object here, okay, a square, as I add additional elements to my project, whether they be shapes or individual paths. I mean, shapes are paths, but you know, separate paths, or every little thing that I choose to add to this will be layered automatically on top of the last one. So if I come back in here and I go ahead and I option click and drag, and I look at the layers panel, you can see that the new rectangle that is highlighted, and you can see that it's highlighted in this little blue box here, then it tells you that it is layered on top of the previous one, and it is the one that is selected. This is the button that I was trying to access before. And let's go ahead and assign a color to that so you can see what's going on. And again, I'm going to go ahead and option click and drag. You could copy paste, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to do that a couple more times so that I have maybe a total of 5 objects. And then I'm going to come back to these and I'm going to recolor them, just so you can see that they are in fact how they're layered on top of one another. Okay. And we'll take this one and we'll make it orange. Okie doke. So I have 5, on a single layer. I have 5 objects, and those 5 objects are all layered on top of one another. And they are layered in the sequential order that I created them. If I select an object from the artboard, you'll notice that it highlights in the layers panel. I can also highlight, or I can select an object from the layers panel itself just by clicking on this little button to the right. That's one of the things that this can do. Over here to the left, you can turn them on and turn them off as well. So if I don't want to see the black object, I can turn that off. It will still print, but it will in fact not be visible. Another thing that you can do with layers is you can rename them, and you can rename the objects within them. If I simply double click, I can name this one squares, just like so. And if I want to look at the properties of that layer, I can double click on that layer to its right. And it brings up this dialog box. And it's in this dialog box that I can rename it again. And that you'll also notice that there is a color that's assigned to each separate layer. In this case, by default, a blue outline is assigned, so that when you select an object, it's highlighted in blue. You could always change it, and these are all the default colors for all the layers that you could possibly have and more. You can assign your own color to layers.
I'm sorry, Professor, can you switch the spotlight?
Yeah, okay, hold on 1 second. Let's see. I need to, so Brooke, you need to be highlighted, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So within each layer, you can determine if you want it visible, if you want preview turned on, if you want to dim the images, and if you want it to print or not. By default, all layers print, even if they are turned off. All objects print, even if they are turned off. You need to go into this little panel if you don't want it to print. There's also a little area here for a template, and we used that, or I showed you that briefly, when we were working on the mask assignment. If you turn this layer into a template, by default, it highlights certain things, that it will lock the layer, it will be visible in preview, and it will dim the image to 50%. So if I click OK, notice what happens. It turns it into a slightly different. Let's twirl that back up. This isn't dimming the object, so I don't know what's going on here. Yeah, I want it dimmed. Well, let's try something a little bit different. I'll bring something else in because this isn't being dimmed for some reason. And to turn that template back off, I'll go ahead and just deselect it. And now all of these elements will print, they will show, they will preview. Okay. If I so choose to bring in another element, for example, remember I had that rustic landscape that I wanted to bring in here. Let's go ahead and zoom out so I can resize this. So we can see the rest of our artboard here. Okay, now I'll zoom back in a bit. If I twirl down, notice that linked object, and that's another topic that I want to talk about, is that when you bring in JPEGs, they are linked or embedded. So at the moment, though, it is linked. That's what is used by default. And if I double click on there, you can show or not. Okay, and you can lock it or not. But this is, in fact, at the very top, and it is a bitmap or raster object. Now, if I want to move the order of these objects, I can do that a couple of different ways. The easiest way, if you have the layers panel, is to simply click and drag on it. Now, if I want it to be at the bottom, I can. Now it's at the bottom of the stack. If I want to move it up, I can hit Command. And I can, if I use the right bracket arrow, it brings it up in the stacking order. If I hit the left bracket, which is to the right of the P key, it moves it down in the stack. So let's bring it back up to the top. And what if I wanted to create and put this on its own separate layer? Then I simply click on this little button down here, create a brand new layer. This is layer 2. And I will name this template. So this is what we're using in this exercise. If I want to make this image, the one that I just imported, a part of that template, then I simply click and drag it and put it into that template layer. Notice that the color of that layer changes. By default, now the second layer that we've added is red when it's highlighted. Templates usually are at the bottom of the stack, so I'm going to click and drag and put that at the very bottom. Okay, so that's at the bottom. And then if I double click to actually turn it into a template, then if I click here, and it should dim the image, there you go. That's what it's supposed to do. See how it dims it so that it isn't quite as bright? It will allow you to draw on top of that. So you can either, and by default, when you turn it into a template, it will not print. And I can always turn that off. Now, if I want, I can go ahead and I can create another layer on top of this. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and create a layer here. And we'll call this one circles or ellipses. We'll just name it circle. And because this layer is on top of the square layer, everything contained in this layer will be above or layered on top of the others. So now I can go ahead and I can create this just as I did before using the ellipse tool, but this time I'll go ahead and I'll create some circles. So I'll go ahead and I'll make copies of those, just as I did with the squares. Let's go ahead. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. I just want to, there we go. Make that a little bit bigger. There we go. Go ahead and make a copy of it by holding down the Option key and dragging across. And I'll make that one red, and I'll make this one green, same order. And this one blue. And this one orange. There we go. So now you'll notice that all of these objects are layered on top of squares. If I wanted one of the squares to be on top of the circles, then what I would have to do is I would have to either create a new layer and place that square on top of the circle layer, or I would have to put it inside the circle layer. So maybe one of the things that I could do, if I wanted to group all of these circles together so I didn't confuse with the others, is that I could create what is called a sublayer. That's what this one is right here. So I'm going to create a sublayer, and we'll call this one circle group. Okay. So now what I can do with that circle group is I can take all of these elements, hold down the Shift key and select them all, and place them within that subgroup. Okay, so again, I'm working with two layers, but within that layer, now I have a subgroup with the circles in it. It's sort of like grouping them, but it's not. They all work independently of one another. So now if I decide, you know what, I want one circle, I want the green circle, or rather the green square to be on top of that, I could come back in here and I could go ahead and I could select this and I could drag it into my circle layer. And now it rests above the circles. So that's one way of handling that, by creating subgroups. I rarely do that. But that gives you an idea of what, what this does now. Okay? It's just a matter of organizing all of these things. Now, one of the other things that this lesson covers is clipping masks. So for example, we had, I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of, let's see. Let me close this. I have squares. I'll I don't know what happened. Oh, shoot, my template is inside that. And I don't want that inside there. I want that to be its own layer. So I'm going to go ahead and move this. I'm going to create a brand new layer. And I want this to be on its own layer. There we go. So there's our template inside there. Let me undo that. I kind of goofed here. Okay. So let's name this. Let me pull this outside of here. There we go. I'm going to get rid of this layer. I just pulled it. It was inside the other group, and I wanted it outside. So I want it to be at the bottom of my stack. But I don't want it to be inside the square layer. So let me move that back out. There we go. Let's go ahead and close the squares, and let's move this back down. And let's turn it back on. I hope I haven't confused you with that. There we go. So for example, let's say I want my image. So I need to make a copy of that. Let's go ahead and make a copy of the template. You can make a copy of layers by clicking and dragging onto the new layer. This new layer, I don't want to be a template. So I'm going to double click and I'll turn template off so that makes it visible again. And I want this to be at the very top at the moment. Now, what I also want to do is I want to take this, and let's say I want this rectangle to be inside the square. Okay. Remember that we could use paste inside. So I could, one way of doing that would be to make a copy of this image or to cut it, Command X to cut. And I could select this image, and then I could come down at the bottom and I could say, what I want to do is I want to draw inside, and then I could go ahead and I could go to Edit, Paste. And that puts it over there. But as soon as I move it over here, notice what happens is that square becomes sort of a mask, and it allows me to put my object inside it. That's one way of creating a sort of clipping mask. Another thing that we can do too, instead of that, I'm going to go back out of Draw Normal. Okay, and I'm going to paste the object again, so we have another one. Let's say I want this to now be inside of the circle. Well, one way of doing that would be, for example, to come up here, and I'm going to create, I already did that here. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it clipping mask. There we go. This is an extra layer that I have here. And I'm going to move the circle. Let's look down here. See, I get confused myself when I look at these. And there's that circle. I'm going to just move that all the way up to this layer here. And I want, again, I want the photograph to be contained within the circle. So the one thing that I have to do is I have to make sure that the circle or the ellipse is at the very top. Then what I need to do is I need to take this photograph, and it also needs to be on the same layer. It needs to be but directly underneath the circle. So I need to find the link, and that's there. So I'm going to move that one up to this new layer. And now I'll move it down just a little bit so that it's underneath the circle. And now what you have to do if you want the photograph to be contained or clipped within that circle is that we have to select both of the elements. Okay, with both of them selected, come on. It's not allowing me to do it. Let me go ahead and select here and here. I'm holding down the shift key so that both are selected. It's not allowing, there's a clipping mask tool right here and it's not allowing me to do it. So I'm going to go to Object and I'm going to go to Clipping Mask, Make. And now you'll notice that it's inside that. Now that should have been available right down here. That's what this is Make or Release Clipping Mask. And you can see that if I turn, make this a little bit more precise, and I'm looking at my clipping mask layer here, that I have the mask, which is the circle. And when you turn a shape into a mask, clipping mask, it removes all of its attributes. And you're just using that shape to contain whatever you want inside it. You can add elements inside that if you want. I mean, I could put another object inside that, but for right now, I'm just using it like a picture frame where I'm hiding all of the external parts of the photograph and placing it, entirely within that circle. So that's another way of handling that.
Professor, would you mind switching the interpreters?
Need to switch again?
Yes, please.
Okay. 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 So again, layers can be very simple, or as you can see, is the way I'm presenting it here today, they can get really, really complex into how you use them. Another thing that we can do too, and I'm just going to select everything and delete it and show you how I organize my artwork on my projects. I'm just going to hit Command A and select them all. Because I haven't locked any of these layers, I can select everything. But it is important to note that while I have all of these layers, if I want to prevent myself or anyone else from accidentally moving or reconfiguring any of these, you can always lock them by just clicking the little lock sign here. You can always unlock them as well. So I don't want to unlock the template. I mean, I could, but I'm going to select them all and just hit delete, and they all go away. Now you'll notice that all the objects go away, but all of the layers don't go away. So to remove the layers, I'm just going to click and drag them into the little trash can here. Get rid of them all. So typically, if I were working on a project like this, and I wanted to organize and arrange certain parts of my elements, I would use guidelines. And in addition to that, with many of the projects that I work on, I incorporate text. So oftentimes I will put text on its own layer, and I'll put the artwork on a separate layer, just to be able to lock it and to organize it in a fairly simple fashion. So to get organized here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up rulers. And I'm going to bring out my rulers here. And I need to create a brand new layer to do that because this bottom layer is locked. I can't work on that. So I'll drag out, if I wanted to determine where my center guides are here. And just to give me some idea here, I want 4 1/4. So that determines the center of my scene. I like doing that. So what I might do, because guides in Illustrator are separate elements, and you can lock them. We can always go to View, and we can go to Guides, and you can hide them, or you can lock them, or you can clear them. But if you don't remember the key commands or you don't want to deal with it, you can work with them in layers. So right now, the only elements that I have on this are the guides. So I will rename this my guide layer. And should I need to add guides to my project, I would put them on this layer. Okay. And now I can just go ahead and click here to lock them down. Now, to make sure that the photograph is aligned according to this, I can go ahead and I can turn off the template for the time being. Okay, so I'll unlock it and I'll select my object. Oh, there we go. Select my object here and use the little corners to center this. I mean, I could always use the align tool to do that, but it's just as easy for right now so that this is aligned in the center of my document. Now I can go ahead and I can either leave that not as a template, but as a separate element. And if I choose to add text on top of this, I can. And again, so that it doesn't get, I don't accidentally move or integrate elements with it. I can always lock this down. So I'll rename this, you know, background. So it's no longer a template layer, but it is locked, you know, temporarily. And now what I want to do is I want to create a layer on top of the background layer. Okay, and I'm going to name this one text. Again, this is typically how I organize my projects. And now I can come back with my text tool and we can, you know, work in here. And I'm going to, let's see, make this a little bit bigger. Let's make it maybe 24 point. I'm just going to leave it Myriad Pro and we'll call it, you know, cabin scene. And I'll highlight it. And just so that we can see it, I want the color, the fill color to be a nice bright white, just so I can see this. There we go. Okay. So now I've isolated everything and it's easy for me to work on individual elements. And if I wanted to add some additional artwork to it, I could go ahead and I could, you know, put it on a separate layer as well, just to help organize myself and to be able to lock, you know, certain elements or unlock them as I needed to. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that, for example, what if I decided to this cabin scene here, the background, because it is locked, I need to unlock it, and I'll select it, that I added a drop shadow to it. Anytime you add effects, and that's what these little dots stand for. They, in fact, let you know that an effect has been applied to that layer. So if I come back and I unlock the background layer, and I go to effects, and I select, let's see what I want. I want, where are you here? Stylize. I'm going to go ahead and stylize and add a drop shadow. Okay, and I'm just going to use the default settings here. So that adds it. But not only does it add it to that shape, but it adds it to the entire layer. Now you can, that can be a benefit, or if you wish, or it can hinder you. But I want to let you know that right now, because this is the only object on that layer, that it was added to the entire layer. So if I wanted to add this to the text, I could come in here and I could hold down the Option key and I could move that up like so. Come on. Oh, it's locked. Never mind. There we go. Now move it up. No, I didn't want to do that. Let's do that again. Let me select my object again. You got the background and why I removed it. No, let's go ahead here. Okay, now it's applied to just this object. So now what I want to do is I want to apply it to the text. So if I click and I drag and I move that up and hold down the Option key, it should, there we go. I've added it. Have I added it or not? Okay, I'm having troubles here. I think partly due to the scale at which I'm working. It's kind of difficult. So let me show you about applying effects to scenes. You can see that this little button is highlighted here. And applying objects to the entire, or applying objects to the entire layer. Now by me clicking and moving it to there, it applies it to the whole layer. So if I create anything inside this layer, okay, it will add a drop shadow to it. So for example, if I come back in here and I make a circle, notice that it automatically adds a drop shadow. So that can be advantageous. You don't have to know, for example, now it's not adding it there. There we go. I don't know why it's not showing it. That was what I was having before. It's making it invisible. Why is that? So it should, oh, because it's to the whole layer. Yeah, that's why. But if I move that off of that, you can see that it's adding the drop shadow. So again, to show you some other examples, if I go ahead and I create another layer on top of this, let's go ahead and move this because it's only added to the layer itself. And because this circle is on top of this image, this drop shadow is a part of that. That's why you don't see the drop shadow on the circle. If I wanted it on the circle, I would have to take and move this from here to here. And let's make sure that this is added to here. Come on. Trying to move them up and down and around, and it's not working. And that's what happens too when you unlock things. So, oh, that was to the clipping mask. So let's go ahead and what happened? Let me hit Command Y and find out what happened to some of my shapes here. So anytime you lose elements, you hit Command Y. Let's bring that back out. That's part of the clipping mask, and I didn't want that a part of the clipping mask. So I need to, that can be a problem. So I need to move that outside of the clipping mask. So I'm going to move it, create a new layer on top of that. And I'm going to move it onto that new layer. There we go. Here's my new layer. Let's go ahead and add color to it. There we go. Let me go ahead and add and show you, since this isn't working for me now. Let me come back. Because I removed the drop shadow to this. Let me go ahead and just make a few objects here. If I select a single object, okay, and I go to Effect, and I select, where do I want it? I want Stylized Drop Shadow. It adds it within that layer only to that object. You can see how that's highlighted. However, if I move it up to the layer itself, notice that it's applied to everything in that layer. So again, that's what these do. They just simply indicate to you that an effect has been added to an element or an entire layer. Okie doke. So that's what these indicate. This indicates that if you want to create or release, so for example, I have this, but I did it differently. So it's not, even though that this is a clipping mask, maybe it's not. It would allow you to do that, to put your object inside a clipping mask. I did it differently though. Before I went to object, arrange, and I said clipping mask make. Okay. So this is sort of a disjointed way of showing you how I organized my things. But I hope it's helpful all the same, and it allows you to organize them like so. And it allows you to lock them and freely change them.
Could we have you switch the interpreters when you get a chance?
Switch again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, there you go. So do I have any questions from you guys so far? Because I'm covering some things that aren't in the lesson at the moment. And most of the things that I am, and I can go into it into detail tomorrow with the lesson itself. No questions? Again, I'm having trouble with the, let me unlock this layer, and because this is applied to just that one, there you go. Now it's working for me. And if I wanted to copy this, for example, I should be able to click and drag and then hold down the Option key. There we go. Now it's working. Now I've applied it to those two. I was able to make a copy of that. And I think from before, I accidentally put it inside a clipping mask. And again, if I only want this to be applied to the last one and the second one not to have a drop shadow, I can do that. So I've applied this to the individual elements. Again, if you want it to be applied to the entire layer, then you just simply click on it and you drag it up to the layer. And now they've all applied, but they've been applied doubly. Notice that I have two separate drop shadows added now, and that can really mess things up. So for me, the way to handle all of that, if I goof as I have right now, would be to bring up the appearance panel. Okay, that's what we did the other day. And you can select each individual element, and to help correct your mistakes, this tells you, okay, you have, right now it's only been applied to the layer. If I select this one, you can see that drop shadow has been applied in addition to the drop shadow that was applied to the layer. So now I can just click on here and I can get rid of that one. And that fixes it for me. Likewise, let me go ahead and pull that off. And let's close that. Let's select this object and the same thing applies. So now you can see that not only has a drop shadow been applied to the entire layer, but I've doubled the effect by applying a drop shadow to the individual object. But with this particular shape selected, I can now take and either just turn it off, or I can select the drop shadow and drag it into the trash. And that helps fix it. Now, what I wanted to do, another thing that I wanted to show you briefly is that, and it does sort of apply to layers, but when you import or place images inside your document, as I have with this little cabin scene here, this little bucolic kind of rustic scene, by default, it links them. I don't know if all of you understand the difference between linking and embedding, but this tells us that this has been linked. And what that means is that when you give someone your Illustrator file and you want them to print it, or you want them to work on it or edit it or do whatever with it, and you want them to have access to everything in that file, you need to make sure that the image that you have placed in your document is incorporated or a part of that, not the file, but in the same folder or adjacent to the Illustrator file that you've sent to that person. If you don't, it will say that it can't find it. To avoid that, then when you import it, you need to embed it. So because I just dragged it in, that automatically linked it. But typically, if I go ahead here and I'm going to create another layer just so that I hopefully don't get confused again. There we go. I'm going to go to File, Place. And I'm going to go onto my desktop. And I need to find this little image that I have here. Here's my rustic scene. Now, if you look down below, it's looking for all readable documents at the moment. Do I want to link this file? Do I want to turn it into a template? Do I want it to replace an existing file? Or show import options? If you select show import options, that will give you other elements to choose. What I want to do now is turn off link, and link is turned on by default. Now when I place it, and notice that when I move my cursor around, I can click and place my object in here. And we can go ahead and shrink it down, make it smaller. This one now is embedded in my Illustrator file. So all I would have to do is, if I wanted to share my Illustrator file with somebody, is give them the file itself. I don't need to worry about this image. It is a part of, and it's embedded in the Illustrator file. This one is not. So I might get an error message because it in fact is linked. Okay. You'll notice that when I click here and we look at this image, it just shows image. It doesn't show link. Link indicates, again, that it is just that, linked to my Illustrator file, that when I share the Illustrator file with someone, that I need to make sure that I include that file with it so that if I include it in a folder or on a hard drive or something, it needs to be there in order for the other person to have access to it. Does that make sense to all of you? I hope. So that's sort of layers in a nutshell. The one thing that I did have trouble with is, let me try it again here. I'm going to select, actually, I'm going to go out of here and I'm going to create, I'm kind of working on the fly here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new artboard. Because I want to show the clipping mask element here. So what I want to do is I want to create a brand new artboard right next to it. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move this object here like so. And I want to work with this layer right here. Okay. Notice as I add layers that the colors are changing. Now, on top of this, I'll go ahead and I'll make another circle or a star shape or whatever I want. Whatever shape you choose, it really doesn't matter. You can use any shape to turn it into a clipping mask. Okay, so here's my star and it's on top of, the star has to be on top of the other shape that's directly beneath it. Now the clipping mask is available. So if I go ahead and I click this, it should take whatever is beneath it and put it inside it. In the past, you had to select both objects. But also notice what it does is it removes the attributes from that so that I don't see, if I reduce the size of the photograph, you know, and I move it like so, notice how only the elements within that are being visible within the star. and I can add other elements to that. I could add, you know, the little this, I could put that inside there. So if you want attributes to show, then probably paste inside would be a better choice. So for example, if I go ahead and let's go ahead and take all of this and I get rid of it to show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and make another star shape again. And I don't want, yeah, I got to get rid of the clipping mask. See, I got to be careful what I'm doing here. So let's get rid of this clipping mask so that that doesn't hide anything. And there's my star. Now, if I wanted to place another object inside this, it might be better for me if I wanted to at some point show the orange. So for example, if I had another little dot or something like that, or I had a rectangle or whatever shape I wanted, let's go ahead and select an ellipse just to show you what I have here. And I'm going to change the color of that so you'll be able to see it. And we'll make it blue. So what that clipping mask does is it serves as a frame. And if I use instead, if I select this, let me go ahead and copy this. So I'm going to make a copy. And now I select this element. And instead, if I use draw inside, and now I paste, notice that my polka dot is in there, but it didn't remove the attributes of the star. The background color is still there. And if I had an outline of the star, it would be there as well. In fact, I could go ahead and I could, you know, I could go back and turn off draw inside, draw normal, select the star, come on. Is it a locked layer? What did I do? I mean, it too is a clipping mask. Let's see. Oh, see, I wasn't paying attention. This is inside a clipping mask. So this is inside a clipping mask. So I'm going to take, I've kind of goofed. But it's working for me the way I had intended. But anyway, if I look here, that's my clipping mask. This is supposed to be a clipping mask. I'm going to throw that away. There we go. So if I wanted to add another element to this, I could. Because they're both clipping masks, but when you select paste inside, I don't know if I'm making sense here, that it retains the attributes. When you use a clipping mask from either the layers panel or up here where you go to object clipping mask make, it removes all the attributes. So depending on what you want to do, is there a better way? I like draw inside better. And the other feature that we have that we didn't talk about yet is draw behind. Because remember I said every time you add a new element, it automatically draws on top of the last one. But if you want to draw behind, you can do that. And you can always, you know, in a variety of ways, move the layers up and down with the objects in various ways. But if you're not careful, and I'm trying, you know, try to walk and chew gum at the same time as I'm talking to you about this, it's easy to get tripped up and to place things inside other little containers that maybe you don't mean to. Okay. So these are all the things that you can do with layers. They're, again, they are intended to basically help you organize all the elements in your project. And in this particular exercise, they've reduced it to 2 layers, but within that layer, those 2 layers, they have, within one layer, they have numerous sub-layers, and within that, clipping groups and all sorts of things in order to help organize it. I probably would have done it a little bit differently and added more layers just to help segregate it and organize it that way. But if you can't, and it has to be within just a single layer, then that would be how you would do it. Okay. So are we good for today? Tomorrow I can go over the lesson in a little bit more detail. This is just to cover the basic properties of layers and what you can do with them and what you can't and that sort of thing. Any questions? Before I stop, let me go ahead and stop recording. Pause.